Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Bullpen. Is back in the bullpen. We have Mr. Rick Green, founder of PatriotAcademy.com. We're going to talk about the Second Amendment and original intent of the framers of the US Constitution. Rick, good to have you back on the show. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Richey, I'm always grateful to be with you, man. I feel like we're living out Proverbs 27, sharpening each other's countenance a little bit, like iron sharpens iron. Anyway, I love being with you, man. Thanks for having me back.
Iron sharpens iron, brother. That's what it says. Thank you so much for being on the show. Okay, I don't want to presume what you know or believe about the Second Amendment. So give me your sentiment for the Second Amendment and your belief about the original intent.
Yeah, and not so much my belief as much as what they said themselves. Basically, two major components to the Second Amendment, or two societal benefits, I should say, both found in the laws of nature and nature's God. The way the founders put it, it was, quote, the first law of nature. So it was this innate ability to defend yourself in the moment, to prevent harm to yourself and your family, but then also to prevent a tyrannical government. So you got guys like John Adams on the first one saying resistance to sudden violence. So for us today, somebody attacks you, the ability to fight back, to protect your wife, your child, yourself, your property, as he said, life, limb, and property, vitally important. Not only is that a law of nature that every human being has, but for us as Americans, we're lucky because it's in our Constitution to guarantee and protect that right. So anytime government infringes on your right to keep and bear arms so you can defend yourself, not only unconstitutional, violates the laws of nature and nature's God. That's number one, resistance to sudden violence. Number two, prevent government from becoming tyrannical. So I'll give you Joseph Story, one of the two fathers of American jurisprudence. He said this one, I love this word, is the palladium, the protector of all the liberties of a republic, because it offers a strong moral check against the arbitrary power and usurpation of that power by government and allows the people to triumph over them. So basically, if we the people are armed, we can prevent government from becoming tyrannical and overcoming our lives and using power that we didn't give them.
That's a good argument, but let me push back on something.
Sure.
And maybe you already know this. What was the number one argument for why we needed to have an armed citizens rank? What was the argument they made?
Number one argument was what I just said, what they called the first law of nature. So Patrick Henry talked about every man should be armed with a rifle. Madison said this is an advantage that we have that the European nations don't have.
That's not true.
Defend. So of course, give me a quote that shows the difference.
Ron, I'm going to help you out here, and I want you to do a little research on this. I know you don't have time to do it right now. Those were arguments as well, but you had many arguments contained. The primary justification based on law and based on the legal or statutory reason why the states needed to have armed citizens was because they did not want to have a professional military. And their primary argument was, in order for us to never have a professional military, we will have a well-regulated militia, because no government would try to overtake citizens who are armed. But if we have soldiers, those soldiers can be used to do that. So we don't want soldiers. Did you forget that the primary argument, brother, was to stop the government from having professional soldiers?
I think that's partially right.
No, sir, I'm 100% right.
Here's where it's partially right. They definitely knew that you could not have military or police officer on every corner. That would be a police state. And so James Wilson, who signed both the Declaration and the Constitution and was an original Supreme Court justice, he said, look, every man's house is his castle. You have a responsibility as the commanding officer of your castle to be armed, to be ready to defend, to be able to grab that musket off the mantle and run out and defend the community as well. So they didn't want a police state. And I think that's really what you're saying. So I don't know that I disagree with you on this. I think that they both, all of these roads we just talked about, all lead to the same place.
But don't you find it interesting, my brother? And thank you for saying you agree with me, because I am right. Don't you find it quite interesting that when we debate and when we have argumentation in relationship to the Second Amendment of the US Constitution, that for some reason you guys on the right tend to leave out the primary justification for the well-regulated militia, which was in order to stop the creation of an actual professional military. You all leave that completely off the table, but that was part of the original design of the framers of the Constitution and the intent of the framers of the Constitution. So we have already left the intent of their original sentiment.
Yeah, first of all, you're not aware of my teachings probably, but I once a month I take hundreds of people out and we do what's called a constitutional defense course, and I teach exactly what you just talked about. So we don't leave it out. I think we're just probably differing a little bit on the terminology. But the principle is the same. The principle is this: that the people are responsible for being armed and able to defend themselves and defend the community in the moment. You don't want that responsibility to be the government's, because if it is, then they can make you do whatever they want. They can turn the whole nation into a place of tyranny. So I think we actually agree on this principle here.
Okay, do you think the right to bear arms is a legal right, meaning constitutional in the way I'm using it, or is it a God-given right? Which one?
I think it's first a God-given right, and I think that's clearly what the founder said, that these are rights given by God.
At what age does God give you the right to own and bear arms? What age?
Well, Richard Henry Lee, signer of the Declaration, the guy that made the motion for independence, said we ought to be teaching our kids while young how to defend themselves and how to use firearms. So,
but brother, answer that question, because if you're saying that it is a God-given right, you would be saying it is a natural right, which is given to you upon being born. You actually do have some constitutional rights that are natural rights, and they are bestowed upon you at birth, such as your right to due process. You cannot deprive even a child without a due process remedy. So you have that right when you're born. You do not have the right to bear arms when you are born, which would suggest that it is not in fact a God-given or natural right, correct?
No, I would disagree with that. I think you do have a right to bear arms at any age. My boys bear arms on our ranch all the time to be able to fight off snakes or.
Come on,
well, no, in my case, I had them carrying and well trained. By 12, they were better trained than most law enforcement officers in America.
But they weren't born with it, though, right? A 2-year-old should not bear arms.
Well, are we discussing the training, or are we discussing the right, the natural ability to defend? Remember, the right is not even just for a firearm, it's the right to defend. The right is self-defense, to be able to fight back. So I think that right is innate from any age. Society,
so it's not the right to bear arms. Listen, everybody agrees, brother, you have the right to defend yourself if somebody tries to attack you or somebody you love. People say, okay, listen, anybody can have the right to defend themselves. That's natural, right? But the right to bear arms is not a natural right. I've heard this argument before. If it was a natural right, you all would be fighting for constitutional amendments and statutory interpretation that would allow children to bear arms. As a matter of fact, the Constitution is silent about the age, and states have been allowed to statutorily interpret what age do you mature into the right. So
yeah, but what you're doing is you're mixing the right of self-defense with one of the means for self-defense. In other words, the right to keep and bear arms is the means to be able to defend your family. And what our founders knew was that the firearm is the great equalizer, and therefore that is the thing that the Constitution guarantees.
Okay, let's talk about how states have interpreted the right to bear arms. I don't like the terminology gun control. You all did something amazing in the messaging arena when you start saying gun control, because it scared the hell out of a lot of people in America. Well, the truth is every constitutional right has a statutory responsibility. You have the freedom of speech. You have the right to say what you want to say without the government infringing upon that right. You and I agree on that right, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and you basically have that right, and the government cannot come in and say, hey, we're now going to penalize you because you said something we disagree with. Okay, however, if you say something that leads to the injury of another person, for example, yelling fire in a crowded building, there's no fire, there's a stampede, you can be charged with a crime. Your speech has a statutory limitation once it starts to infringe on the life and liberty of somebody else. We don't call that speech control, do we?
Well, we would if you did it before the person was able to speak. In other words, what you're talking about is a punishment after the fact when you've abused the right of free speech. I'm fine with punishment for someone that abuses their right to keep and bear arms. If you're gonna now tell me that you have the right to prevent me from keeping and bearing those arms based on your definition of when I need to be able to keep and bear arms, now you are in fact infringing upon that right and that self-defense because you're doing it before the act.
You know, I'm glad you made that point. So let me offer this as a rebuttal, okay? The freedom of speech, you're saying it's cool to take that away or penalize you if you engage in that freedom and you are irresponsible with that engagement. You're
like
okay
libel or slander, right? I mean, if you defame someone, there's legal remedies to come in.
Right, that's a civil offense, correct.
Yeah.
So the right to bear arms, you think that right is absolute?
Well, it depends on what you mean by absolute. I'll give you St. George Tucker, one of our founding fathers that's known as the Blackstone, the American Blackstone, because he took Blackstone's commentaries and applied them to American law. He said, if you infringe on the right to keep and bear arms under any color or pretext whatsoever, liberty is, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. Here's what that means. When you start deciding as government where I can carry my firearm, where I can carry my handgun to defend myself, you put me in danger. So if I'm in the Walmart or I'm in the restaurant or I'm at the school or wherever it is, and you've prevented me from having my firearm because you think it's not safe for that firearm to be there, and then my daughter's raped or I'm harmed or my family is harmed, government has actually created that arm. So yeah, I would say the right to keep and bear arms and always have my firearm with me is absolute. Now, not to be able to go on your property. If you have private property, I think you ought to be able to say no in terms of what I can carry. But in terms of my freedom to move about the country and always be able to defend my family, I wouldn't want your children or your family to not be defended in any particular place. Neither should mine.
I believe in common sense gun laws. All right, I just believe in common sense.
Example of that. Give me an example.
A common sense gun law would be you don't have the right to bear an arm that could kill 20, 30 people at one time. I think there should be restrictions to particular weaponry. I don't believe that the debate has been fully vetted as far as politics as well as social progression in America. I also believe that, let me finish. I also believe that individuals
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who are mentally ill, they have a mental health diagnosis, they have committed certain criminal offenses. I don't think they should have the absolute right to bear an arm. I don't think so. Yeah. But let me ask you this question, because Texas did something interesting. They're the largest state to do it. You can, have a gun, no need for a permit, no need for a license, right? You have this right to carry rule. Are you in agreement with the Texas rule for carrying guns?
Absolutely, 100%, and here's why. And I will point out that you said that when that passed, we would have absolute chaos and mayhem, I think was the word that you used. That has not happened. It has not happened in any state that has passed constitutional carry. It allows law-abiding citizens to be able to defend themselves, so it's actually helped in all of the states that has been passed. But here's the fundamental difference in what we're saying. When you say that you don't think you should be able to have a firearm that could kill 20 or 30 people at a time. See, here's the fundamental difference. If you understand self-defense, then you know that those types of weapons are out there and criminals have them, and therefore the law-abiding citizen must have them. This is why Stephen Williford was able to save 27 lives at Sutherland Springs. The bad guy had weapons like that. Stephen Williford was able to use an AR-15 to stop him and save lives. And Joe Biden said that not the bad guy, Stephen Williford, should not have been allowed to have that AR-15. So we're gonna let the other 27 people die because we don't want the law-abiding trained citizen to be able to stop that crime.
That's interesting because literally that's a microcosm and it does not explain the macrocosm of how it happens the other way. When you have stockpiles of weapons, when you have ammunition up to the hundreds of thousands, these individuals are typically planning. You see the federal government raiding a compound with all of these weapons, and they're not planning something good, brother. They're planning something bad. But let me take you back.
But those are so few. Those are such a small percentage of the crime in America.
Anyway. What you just described happens in less than 1% of the time. So you can't talk to me about percentages. But let me take you back.
Right.
Let me take you to Texas because I have limited time.
Hey, look, you could take my 1911.
I have limited time, brother.
With 10 rounds could be used with 3 magazines to kill 20 or 30 people.
Now we into whataboutism, which I don't engage in.
It's the human being, it's not the weapon. See, you're placing the blame on
a brother.
I
got you. So Rick, you like the Texas law.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Which is called constitutional carry.
Right.
And the idea behind constitutional carry is that because bearing arms is a right, you should not be forced to provide any license to say you have this right. You should not be compelled based on the statute to present a permit. that you have this right. So you believe in constitutional carry. That's fine. You believe in that for guns.
What you just described is essentially innocent until proven guilty as well, right? It's the idea that I shouldn't have to prove my rights to you. Those rights are inherent.
Okay, good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good, you shouldn't have to prove it. You believe you have the right to vote?
Of course, yeah.
You believe you have the right to vote? Should you have to present ID to exercise that right?
Absolutely.
Why? You don't have to present a license, ID, a permit to exercise your right to bear arms, but you need to present an ID to exercise your right to vote.
Here's the difference.
Okay.
Here's the difference. You're entitled to one vote, right? You get to vote once. And so therefore the system has to know that you are only voting once and that I'm only voting once and that I am the person casting that vote. I'm entitled to carry my firearm anywhere that I go. Now, listen, if I'm driving along on the road, I break a law and the police officer pulls me over, should I have to show my ID to prove who I am driving that car? Absolutely. You
don't have a right to drive a car, brother. You have a right to vote, you have a right to bear arms. You have made the argument on this show that your right to bear arms is not only absolute, but it should not require any prerequisite presentation of an ID, a permit, or a license. However, in order to exercise your right to vote, you maintain the argument that in order to engage in that right, you must present an ID to participate, which by the way was unheard of 21 years ago in this country. Nobody had to present an ID to vote in this nation 21 years ago.
How far back you want to go? Because you used to have to walk up and ring the bell and vote for whoever you were voting for in front of everybody, and everybody knew who you were voting for, and you only got to cast one vote. I mean, I know we can agree on this. We can agree on the fact that every person should be able to vote and they should only be able to vote once, and that we should know that they're only voting once. You and I both want a verified election.
Have you ever worked at an election?
Absolutely.
Have you ever worked one? Okay, there are sophisticated systems that literally record when a person has voted. And even with the presentation of an ID, you can still vote more than one time and technically get away with it until after the election. So even with the presentation of the ID, people still have committed voter fraud. There's a case that just hit the news in Texas of a Republican, 61-year-old Republican who voted twice.
And shame on him or her, whoever that is. Let me try to get us back on.
The point is, brother, the ID did not make the difference. Yeah, the ID did not make the difference. That's the point.
Yeah, but it can, and it absolutely is necessary to be able to be sure that we're only having people vote once and verify. I mean, we all need verification. We all
know what's necessary.
But you know what we really need? Look, let's try this quote. Frederick Douglass said that all of us have our rights protected in 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and guess what? The cartridge box. So we both want to have good voting. We both want to have good juries and not a 2-tier justice system. And we should both want Americans to be able to defend their family and prevent a tyrannical government from taking away our rights. I think we can agree on that, right?
Rick, you make a non-constitutional argument as it relates to the right to vote. Then you make a purely constitutional argument as it relates to the right to bear arms. Think about this. What you're talking about, does the Constitution require that you present ID to vote?
Does the Constitution require that you present an ID to vote? No.
Right. Okay. So you're making so that is a statutory argument.
Still must be able to prove that you only voted once.
Rick, think about what you're saying, brother. Literally, you do not have to present an ID to bear an arm, to bear a gun in your perfect world.
Now, I can be challenged on that. If I'm open carrying and a police officer is concerned, I can have to present ID to just to show.
Not according to the law, brother. Even in Georgia, a police officer can, if they see you with a gun, they cannot legally ask you for your permit.
If it depends on the situation.
Isn't that stupid?
What's going on in that situation?
Rick, come on, man, come with me on this. Isn't that silly?
These extreme examples. Let's stick to the principle.
That's not an extreme example. That's a current law in multiple states.
Can we agree on the right of self-defense? Do you want to be able to defend your family? Of course,
man. Everybody has the right to defend themselves. That's not the argument today.
A fan of the Second Amendment. That's how you do it. Hey, Rick, I invite you to come train with me. I'd love for you to come and be a part of our training. You should come.
Can I say something, Rick? Let me say something to that. Ain't no way in the hell I'm gonna be out in the wilderness with guns and your crew. Brother, that's just not happening.
We're not in the wilderness, we're in the desert when we do it.
Yeah, that's even worse. All right, Rick, I appreciate you being on the Indisputable. Thank you, my friend, for always giving us 100% of what you believe in.
God bless you, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.